It's hard to believe, but NBA Jam, the arcade game, turned 20 years old this year. Um, that means that I was 21 when it came out, and my first memory of the NBA Jam arcade game is a positive one. At the time, I was living in Worcester, Massachusetts. I was working as a long distance operator for AT&T, and the day that I hit the arcade to play the game, I was actually on what's called a split shift. I had 4 hours to work in the morning and then another 4 hours that I would work after dinner time. So I had a good 4 or 5 hours in between, and I would just kind of spend it downtown. And there was a pretty good arcade just off of Main Street in Worcester that I would go to hang out at in situations like these when I had the extra money. So I walk into the arcade, and not 3 seconds afterwards, I start hearing these booming catchphrases from the back of the arcade. Boom shakalaka. Is it the shoes? Oh my. I'm like, okay, what is this? I need to know what this is. So I make my way through the arcade to the back, and I see the NBA Jam marquee, and I see a fella playing. He's in the fourth quarter. The game's pretty close. He winds up winning. And he looks at me and he says, all right, are you in? And of course I said, heck yeah, I'm in. So it was $2 for a full 4 quarters, 50 cents a quarter. So I put the money in, and away we went. Took me about a quarter or so to get used to the controls. Not that the controls were difficult, but some of the things like shoving and about passing out of dunks to get good open three-point looks, which was really my big weapon. I think I might have dunked in that game maybe a handful of times, maybe 5 or 6 times. A lot of my shots were from the outside, and that's what kept me close because he was so dominant inside as a defender. I had to do something to keep the game close by shooting outside. So as with most NBA Jam games, when you're playing with two players, the game is pretty much close throughout. I was down by 5 at one point. I had trimmed it to 2 with 10 seconds to go in the game. And if you're an NBA Jam player, you're probably familiar with how the story ends when you have the ball and you're down 2 with 10 seconds to go. I took the ball from one end of the court to the other, stepped outside the three-point line with about 1.1 seconds left to go. The three-pointer went in. I wound up winning by 1. The guy I was playing against launched into a stream of expletives and stormed off, and my love affair with NBA Jam began. So in the days and the months that followed, anywhere where there was an NBA Jam machine, I would be found. I would play this game as much as I possibly could, even though it was very expensive, to try and get my name on the leaderboard, to try and get through all of the teams, to see all the secret stuff. It was really, really cool. And perhaps my most favorite memory of the arcade game is in the fourth quarter. If you're up enough and you go in with a pretty aggressive dunk, shattering the backboard is so memorable because the first time it happens, you don't expect it to happen, and then you hear through the arcade speakers just this booming sound and broken glass, and you're like, oh yeah, that was me, I did that, and it just pumps you up for the rest of the game. And that, I mean, I was hooked from there. So quarter after quarter, token after token. I really didn't play against people very much from that point on. I would pretty much play against the computer because I tend to play games solo. And I was satiated, but when I found out that NBA Jam was coming to consoles, I was all over that, and I was ready for it. So it wound up happening in March of 1994. Jam Day finally arrived. I had moved from Worcester to Chicopee because the phone company job, I had been laid off. The phone company location had actually closed. So here I am. I'm living in Chicopee. It is snowing to beat the band outside. I have no car, but it's Jam Day. So I get my gear on, I get my Walkman on, and I walk the 1.5 miles each way to and from the local mall to get my Genesis copy of NBA Jam. That's, by the way, not the actual copy that I bought in 1994, by the way. This is a copy that I got when I got my Genesis just after my birthday last year. So I get back home, I'm cold, I'm wet, and I don't care. I run up the stairs to my bedroom where my Genesis is. I shed all the wet clothes. I put the cartridge in the machine. I turn the power on, and away I go. Hours fly by. I played no fewer than 10 games against the computer. I won all 10. And it was just so neat being able to play a game that I had played in the arcade and love in the arcade so much at will. There were certain sacrifices and compromises that had to be made, of course. Um, for example, Tim Kitzrow in the arcade sounds bassy and booming, and of course, if the arcade operator has the sound ratcheted to 10, it's going to be really, really loud. The Genesis version, he's kind of compressed and tinny sounding, and he doesn't have as many catchphrases, but that's okay. The music sounded kind of tinny as well. Again, it's kind of acceptable. The players weren't quite as detailed, and of course the Genesis didn't have scaling and rotation hardware under the hood, so you didn't get the players getting big when they came closer in and then kind of getting smaller when they were on the far side of the court. But that was okay, because the heart and soul of the NBA Jam experience, Iguana Entertainment nailed it when they did the home version of NBA Jam. And it was fantastic. I would actually use my experience in the Genesis version to take to arcades, wherever there was an NBA Jam machine that I saw, and I actually got a little bit better. I learned how to pass more effectively, how to give the ball up more, because I don't give the ball up. I'm a big ball hog, but it really doesn't matter because I'm just going to score anyway. But I learned to give the ball up when I saw that I was getting blocked, and there were some other skills that I had learned. And the Genesis version helped out with that tremendously. And it wasn't too long, probably about 6 months after, I found a good sale on the Super Nintendo version of NBA Jam and picked that up as well. I'm glad that I got the Genesis version first, though. The biggest reason is because the Super Nintendo version does not have a battery backup to it. And those of you who were playing video games in the late 80s and early to mid 90s, games without batteries where you had to write down passwords, that was just a pain in the butt back then. We didn't have camera phones back then, so you had to write down the password and you had to hope that you wrote it down correctly, especially if there were special characters other than letters and numbers. Then when you turned the game back on, you had to enter the password before you started to play. And it's just, it kind of, it doesn't interrupt the experience, but it puts up a roadblock, which is a little bit annoying. The Genesis version didn't have that. It had a battery, so when you were done playing, your record was saved, and that was that. So that was a pretty big deal. There were other minor things about the Genesis game in terms of the way that it performed, in terms of the audio performance. I believe that Timmy Kitzrow had a little bit more to say in the Genesis version than the Super Nintendo version. There was a little bit more music in the Genesis version than the Super Nintendo version. The biggest advantage that the Super Nintendo version had was the controller layout. It was much easier to play on the Super Nintendo because of the trigger buttons. As long as you had your turbos assigned to one of the two trigger buttons, it was really easy to roll your fingers across to shoot and pass. Whereas on the Genesis controller, you don't have those triggers, especially for the basic controller. What I usually do is have turbo assigned to the B button, and then I have shoot for A and pass for C, so I kind of roll my thumb back and forth. It tends to cramp my hand now. It didn't back then, but I definitely notice it now as being just a little bit of a roadblock, but it's not that big a deal. So again, NBA Jam turning 20 this year, and then the home versions will be 20 next year. And it's one of my favorite games of all time. Now, of course, the NBA Jam games did expand, and I actually brought them with me, where we had NBA Jam Tournament Edition. Here's the Genesis one and the Super Nintendo one. And the Super Nintendo one now has a battery, so we didn't have to worry about passwords anymore, and this wound up being the definitive version to get for Tournament Edition. So those are the Tournament Edition ones. And then, of course, in 1995, the launch of the PlayStation, 9/9/95, I wound up getting NBA Jam Tournament Edition on disc. Here's the manual for it. I actually just replaced the disc because it had snapped on me a few years ago. and I got a good deal on Amazon, so I finally replaced it. But that was one of the two launch games that I got for the PlayStation back in September of '95. The other one, of course, was Ridge Racer. So those are the Tournament Edition games. Then you had your Hang Time games. Here is the best version of it right there. NBA Hang Time for Nintendo 64. Bar none, this is the version to get if you're only going to get one. Here's the Super Nintendo version that I have as well. This one isn't too bad. And here is the PlayStation version, which I actually have had in my collection from the get-go. This is an original copy. And then finally, after all that, we had the NBA Showtime games. Here is the PlayStation version, and I just picked up the Nintendo 64 version last month. So as you can see, the NBA Jam games have been immense in terms of their, well, not immense, but they've just been big favorites of mine through the years. And there you have it. So thanks very much for watching, you guys. I know this was a lot of talking, but this leads to something else. I'm actually going to be putting together a series of articles called Consolation Time Machine, which I'm going to be submitting to RetroWare TV as a user submission. And this video will probably be a part of that. But in order to keep myself writing and to keep myself in the swing of things, I'm moving Consolation Time Machine over there to see if I can attract a bit more traffic and to kind of give back to the RetroWare community, as they've just been fantastic and have given me so many hours of entertainment and so much content that I felt that it was time for me to contribute my own 2 cents, my own pieces, and see if maybe I can't work myself into being seen by more people. So that's where you'll see the written stuff. This video will be a part of that, I'm sure, but for now this is a little bit of teaser for that. So happy 20th anniversary to NBA Jam. Happy 20th to Mark Turmel and the entire team that put the game together. This guy right here is extremely appreciative of the game, and I'm going to love it probably until the day I'm dead. So thanks very much, everybody. I'll see you soon.